Hey guys, welcome to the Meek Brothers Wrestling Review. This is the inaugural episode. As you can see, we are in two different worlds here as far as technology goes. I apparently am working with the JFK footage from 1970s, 60s, and Blake, meanwhile, has a nice new, much more up to date and HD look. So I apologize for that. I'll try to fix that before we do another episode. Who wants to, anyway?
You're sitting in Wrestlemania 1. I'm sitting in
There you go.
WrestleMania 38.
I'm WrestleMania 1. You're much more current on the presentation here. Just a full disclosure, I have never used the actual camera on my computer in my living room before for any reason. So I had no idea what it was going to look like until I just logged in, and this is how it came out. So we'll work on that and see if we can't make that better. We are going to discuss WrestleMania 1. And before we get started, I kind of want to set it up a little bit and kind of let you know what we were trying to do, because we've both been wrestling fans most of our lives anyway. Yeah. I haven't always been able to follow it. When I was a kid, we lived down a dirt road that had no cable and had no intentions of getting any cable because it wasn't profitable for the cable company. So I was literally had to grow up watching Saturday Night Main Event on NBC and maybe some old tapes from the video store when the pay-per-views would come out on video 6 months later. And then maybe if I was at a friend's house, I might be able to watch an episode of Raw or of Primetime Wrestling or something like that when that was out. But that was about it. I didn't get to really follow it until the Attitude Era. I was into that, of course. And that's about when you would have probably been, because we're 10 years apart in age. So while I was during the Hulkamania era, Blake came along in time for the Attitude Era. So we have a little bit different perspectives on some of these old events. But I was watching when the WWE Network came out. I started watching all of the old pay-per-views that I didn't get a chance to watch as a kid. And it kind of led to being the completionist that I am. I decided I'm going to watch everything. So I started watching WrestleMania 1, and I watched as many primetime wrestlings as I could find anyway on TBS, all the pay-per-views for WCW and the Saturday night shows, and then Raw and Monday Nitro when those came out. And then kind of got the idea that maybe it would be interesting to have a podcast where we talk about all those old shows. I haven't seen a lot of podcasts. The idea can kind of be accredited a little bit to a podcast with Bruce Pritchard and one with Tony Schiavone that are done with Conrad Thompson, where he kind of goes back and looks at things through their point of view, some of the old pay-per-views and such like that. But I thought it'd be cool to look at it from a fan's point of view. I don't know any of the back information and the side stuff, the details from behind the scenes and all that. I just thought it'd be fun to look at the shows. So we're going to go through them, starting with WrestleMania 1, and talk about the matches. We're going to talk about the characters. We're going to talk about the storylines, what we liked, what we didn't like. Blake is much more of a position to give maybe some wrestling grades on some of these things. I'm not really good at that. So I'm going to be the research guy. I'll give some details, and then we'll let Blake grade some of these matches, grade the shows overall. These early shows probably not that great.
No,
but it's interesting to go back, or at least it's interesting to me. Hopefully, some of you guys are watching and will find it interesting as well. So with that said, I want to go back to WrestleMania 1, and it's important to note, and we were just talking about this before the show. WWF and the way wrestling was in general was much different back then, because all of their money came from house shows and tickets sold to house shows. So they didn't give things away on TV. If you go back to the TV shows during that time, the Primetime Wrestlings, which is a fantastic show with Bobby Heenan and Gorilla Monsoon, I highly recommend that you go watch it. They're so hilarious and entertaining.
Probably the best commentator duo ever.
Oh, yeah. That's one of the reasons I started watching, because I originally was just going to start with the first Monday Night Raw and watch forward. But I realized, like, I want to go back and watch all the Heenan stuff because he was so funny. And so that's the main reason I went back to WrestleMania 1 when I started watching. But they did not give anything away on those shows. It was always just teasers and some enhancement matches. And then they would show the major storylines that they wanted you to go pay to see at the house shows. So even this first WrestleMania, as we go through it, you'll see that the matches are not like the money matches. It's more of a lot of setting up to get people to go watch the matches at the local house shows where they made their majority of their money. They didn't know how these pay-per-views were going to go and how much they would make from them. Obviously, it caught on and it worked out for them. They didn't know that going in. So that's kind of something to keep in mind as you watch the first episode.
They were that, and they were celebrity events at this point still.
They did. And WrestleMania has kind of got a tradition with that. And you'll see as we get to the events, like they definitely bring in some of the celebrities. But yeah, this first one, they pulled out all the stops. They had a lot of the famous people from that time period, of course. Liberace and Billy Martin, manager of the New York Yankees, and Muhammad Ali.
Mr. T.
Mr. T was obviously in one of the matches itself.
They had, who was it that came down for the women's match? Cindy Lauper. Yeah,
and that was part of the rockin' wrestling connection that they had going, which was kind of what led into this WrestleMania and was kind of the genesis of the main event that we'll get to with Hogan and Piper and such. That was all set up through the rockin' wrestling connection. The events that are important leading into WrestleMania 1, the first one, and these were a couple of the Rockin' Wrestling events that were kind of co-authored by MTV. WWE would have the show. MTV would get to show one match live from that event on MTV and gained a lot of new viewers that way. So that's why Cyndi Lauper was involved. Mainly. But at the first of those events, which was in July of 1984, was the Brawl to End It All, is what it was called. The main match from that event was a match involving the women's division, such as it was in 1984, obviously not as big as it is now. But at that point, going into that event, the Fabulous Moolah had actually been champion, WWE/WWF/NWA champion, for 28 consecutive years. They're at least as far as reigns recognized by the WWF now. She lost it once or twice for like a month, but they don't count those. So for all intents and purposes, for 28 years, the Fabulous Moolah had been the women's WWF heavyweight champion. At the Brawl to End It All, Wendy Richter actually beat her, which was a really monumental event if you were into women's wrestling at all. It was huge. The first time losing in 28 years, at least a championship match. So that was the main event at that time, or the main match in that particular event. They went on also on that show, and I don't think it was on TV, but there was a Piper's Pit, a very famous Piper's Pit, where he attacks Jimmy Snuka, hits him over the head with a coconut, and that resulted in him hiring a bodyguard. And by him, I mean Piper. The bodyguard was Cowboy Bob Orton, which would lead into WrestleMania 1. Paul Orndorff also was associated with Piper and, of course, with Cowboy Bob Orton as well. And then we get to the second of the pre-WrestleMania events, which was the War to Settle the Score. Fantastic names, by the way.
Yes.
This was in February of 95, so just a month and a half or 2 months before the WrestleMania. At this event, Leilani Kai would beat Wendy Richter for the women's championship. That wasn't on TV. The match that was on TV, however, was Hogan versus Piper. And in this match, there was a brouhaha, so to speak, where the heels, which was Piper and his crew, attacked Hulk Hogan. This got Mr. T involved. Also got Jimmy Snuka involved, which is what set up the main event for WrestleMania 1, which is, of course, Piper and Orndorff versus Mr. T and Hulk Hogan. So, with all the backstory kind of for us here, we lead into WrestleMania 1 and match, which I find some fascinating trivia about, and that is Tito Santana. He's facing an enhancement talent, and it was Playboy Buddy Rose is his actual name, or the name he went by in the territories. Here he was the Executioner. He didn't get to be himself, but he was actually a pretty big name on the independent circuit. I don't know if you looked into his past or anything, but he was like a 20-time champion, if you count.
Yeah, he was a big name.
He was a really big name in the Pacific Northwest mainly. But here he's obviously going to be an enhancement talent. Tito Santana opened up WrestleMania. First things first, I know he was a little bit before your time. You probably caught some of the end of his career when you started watching wrestling, but for me, Tito Santana was, I kind of caught his heyday when I was able to catch it. But kind of underrated superstar, I think, all time. Like, he was really, really good when he was, younger and was able to kind of be in the title mix, especially around the Intercontinental title.
Yeah, I remember him a little bit. I think I mostly know him from, he did commentary at WWF.
Yeah, he did. Spanish announce.
Is more of what I know him from than actual wrestling.
Yeah, he was really good, and he was really involved in the Intercontinental title picture, and that's really one of the feuds that would kind of be the forefront of this whole pay-per-view. He had won the championship. He had debuted in '83, late '83, and he won the championship, the Intercontinental Championship, in fairly early '84. So it wasn't much after he got there. He was already, pushed to the, near the top of the card,
right?
And won the Intercontinental Championship from Don Morocco in February '84. And he ended up losing that in September of that year to Greg Valentine. Valentine in that match, kayfabe injured his leg with the figure four, and that would go to play into this match, of course. The match itself was not, obviously it's nothing special. It's an enhancement talent versus, and now Santana, like I said, he's a good talent, and he can really have a good match with just about anybody. And even this match wasn't terrible. There was a pretty cool spot in it. I don't know if you remember, but the Executioner, I keep wanting to call him Playboy Buddy Rose, but the Executioner got knocked over the top rope and basically landed in a chair that was sitting there empty.
Yes, I do.
It was kind of cool looking. It looked like I don't know if he did it on purpose, but it looked like he did it on purpose.
Yeah.
Like he landed perfect, like right in the chair. So I thought that was a pretty cool spot. But the main thing, like I said, was the advancement of the Intercontinental Championship storyline. And to that end, the finish of the match was that instead of his normal finishing move, which is a flying forearm, which actually looks excellent when he does it, but he finished him off with the figure four, which is Greg Valentine's finishing move. So that was a nod to the hammer, and Tito gets the win. Interesting trivia on this match. I don't know if you're aware of this or not either, but Tito Santana was in the first 9 WrestleManias. He had a match in all of the first 9 WrestleManias. I think the 9th one was a dark match, but he was in all 9 WrestleManias. He had matches.
Yeah.
He won this one and then lost the next 8 in a row. This was the only WrestleMania match that he ever won, and it was opening the show. It wasn't a bad opener.
No, it was fine.
For an enhancement match, it went, I think, 7 minutes, a little over 7 minutes. But I'll let you jump in here, and you can kind of grade and give me on the match.
It was a fine match. As far as grades go, it's probably middle of the road, 4 or 5. Nothing offensive. It wasn't, something you look at and go, "Oh my God, that's horrible." But it wasn't anything special. I thought, but with it
was clean. There wasn't any mistakes that looked bad or out of place.
No. I thought with the interview before the match with the Executioner, talking about nobody knows who he is or how much he weighs, that they were going to do something with it, but they didn't. So I'm not sure.
He did say in the interview before the match, he did, again, furthering the storyline, he did mention that he was going to break or damage Tito's leg. He mentioned the leg specifically that Greg Valentine had injured at the previous when he won the belt. So I thought that was at least a good job of keeping the continuity going and the storyline going.
It's something that they don't do enough today.
Yeah,
people get beat down and injured in a match, and then the next week it's like they might put a little bit of tape on it, and
right.
So there are some things that they did do better back then. The continuity with injuries, I don't want a match full of limb work like they used to do back then, but they made it mean something when they did do it.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. After this match, one of my favorite running themes through this whole thing, I don't know if you noticed it or not, but one of my favorite parts through this whole event was the in-between matches. You could tell that they had never put on one of these events before, first of all, because they had Lord Alfred Hayes stationed in the aisle. So the wrestlers were constantly walking in front of him, behind him. They were like touching him when they'd walk by. But Lord Alfred Hayes, who is kind of a legend in the industry. Beloved guy. But hysterically here, every time they would cut to him and he would try to talk about the next match, he was trying to read from cue cards.
Yes.
And you could visibly see him reading he would have to keep pausing to read. Up next is King Kong Bundy, who weighs 300 and he kept reading from the cards, and it was cracking me up every time they would cut to, like I said, not even counting the fact that the wrestlers keep walking in behind him and in front of him, and it was just hysterical to me. I was laughing.
It was very, very noticeable.
Yeah, and especially because right after that they would cut to Mean Gene, Gene Okerlund, who is absolutely fantastic at what he does, and so he was so good. And Lord Alfred Hayes was, I don't want to say necessarily bad. Maybe I don't know if that was something he was just learning to do at the time and was kind of learning on the fly, but it was definitely one of the more hysterical moments of the show was watching him try to read these cue cards.
Yeah.
The next match, speaking of King Kong Bundy, was King Kong Bundy, who was brand new to the WWF at the time. They had brought him in. I don't know, and I don't want to insult people, but I don't know that there's maybe unique is a better word than making fun of him. But I don't know that there's a dude that looks exactly like King Kong Bundy. Is such a unique, we'll go with that, looking guy. Like he's got this big, massive upper body, and he's fat, you could say too, but it's more like you can tell he's also like he's big. He's got big shoulders with these little skinny legs, or at least skinny compared to his upper frame, and then that bald head. He's really pale. Like he's such a weird looking guy, just in general. But he was big, and that was kind of what WWF wanted at the time. They wanted big guys to feed to Hogan. So they brought him in and was letting him get some work. Here he goes against Special Delivery Jones. Special Delivery Jones is maybe the ultimate enhancement talent. Like this guy's been around since like the 70s, and he's always been an enhancement talent, almost always. I think he had a couple of short runs with a random belt here or there in some of the territories, but they were pretty random and short-lived, and he was mostly just an enhancement guy, but he was like all-time enhancement guy. And he comes in here, they said 8 seconds, I think, from bell to actual pin was used, but for their purposes, they said it was 8 seconds to make a big deal out of it. It was a squash match over enhancement talent, so it wasn't really much to go on there. Bundy splashed him in the corner, then splashed him on the ground, pinned him for the 3. Yeah. I don't know that there's a whole lot you can really grade with that. Wasn't much to it. It was really just to establish Bundy as a big guy and a monster that would eventually get to Hogan, and we'll see that match on a future episode of WrestleMania. But that was really all there was to that one.
Speaking of ST Jones, or Special Delivery Jones.
Special Delivery Jones.
4-time tag team champion.
Well, okay. Yeah, I knew he had a few runs with belts here and there. But,
and 2019 WWE Hall of Famer.
Yeah, absolutely. I did. It's actually in my notes. I just skipped over it because I didn't. Pretty amazing. The Hall of Fame, and I can't say he doesn't deserve it. Like I said, he's okay. He's an enhancement talent, but he's like Brooklyn Brawler level enhancement talent. Like he's been around forever. He's fought everybody as an enhancement talent, and he makes them look good. He does a good job. He's not which is why he stuck so long. He was really good at what he does, and that's an important, underrated job. Like without enhancement talent, you don't have stars. Like you can't, especially back in those days, you couldn't. You had to have guys that could make the main stars look good.
Oh yeah,
and he did a good job at it. Another enhancement match followed, and now the next one is kind of interesting to me because the enhancement talent in this particular match was Matt Bourne. If you don't know who Matt Bourne is, then fast forward a few years, and he's Doink the Clown. He is facing Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, who is all-time great and was one of my favorites when I was a kid. Like Ricky the Dragon Steamboat was right up there with Hulk Hogan for me. Like this guy was so exciting, and as we get into some other later shows, we'll try to do a discussion at some point of some of the all-time great matches in wrestling history, and there are more than one that involve Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Because he was just a fantastic athlete and really good. But Matt Bourne was, he was around as well. He was another guy that fared well in the territories. He hung around with NWA for a bit. He was Big Josh in WCW or Jim Crockett Promotions or whatever you want to call it. Here he's an enhancement talent. He was clearly going to lose to Steamboat, but he was a pretty good worker from what I've heard and known and saw. What I did see. He was a guy that could be counted on to come in and give a good match and make Steamboat look good, which is what happened. Steamboat got the win. I believe it was with a. I'm trying to read my really messy handwriting.
It was a crossbody from the top rope.
Top rope crossbody and got the pin. About 4.5 minutes. So it was another short match, an enhancement match, is what you'd expect. But go ahead. What was your thoughts on that one?
It was the best match of the first 3, at least. I mean, it was.
Yeah.
Any match that's got Steamboats in it is going to be a good enough match. Bourne is, he's a good wrestler. He can make Steamboat. Not that Steamboat needs somebody to make him look good, but he can do his part. And it was a good match. I enjoyed it as far as matches on here go.
For a 4.5 minute enhancement match, I'm sure it gets a whole lot better than that. Steamboat,
no, probably not.
And Steamboat. By the way, Steamboat, he's known as sort of the kind of fast moving, the sort of karate kind of stuff and the high flying top rope stuff. He was freaking jacked.
He's a big dude. He
was ripped.
Yeah.
In those days, like, as he got a little bit older, obviously you don't maintain that kind of muscle tone. But man, back in this WrestleMania 1, he was ripped, man. He looked like he'd probably just kick me all the way up and down the road if he wanted to.
He almost had to be for WWE back then.
That was it, yeah. And you're right. That was a important point. So even the guys that were not like the giants, so to speak, or the big guys, they were smaller guys, but they were in fantastic shape. You had Savage. You had Steamboat, and guys like that were even if they weren't big, they were muscular and were cut out of granite basically. And the first thing I noticed about Steamboat, like I remember him from my childhood as being this really fun to watch guy, but he was also Greek god physique that he was.
He was huge.
We got some more Lord Alfred Hayes in between the matches. I made a note here that he was in the way. Basically, he was trying to do talk about the next match. Wrestlers were just going in front of him behind. And then we were leading into the San Martinos, and Bruno, obviously big time, all time great star, Hall-Famer, one of the real legends in the business. His son here was going to be the one in the match this time with the not yet barber Brutus Beefcake, who was, I guess his gimmick was sort of a male stripper type thing or something.
Something of that nature,
yeah, something like that. But and Brutus was a big dude too. I don't really realize it because he was obviously next to Hogan a lot, but especially during this time before his accident, he was a really big dude and pretty cut as well. San Martino, not necessarily. He's kind of not a typical. If you go back and look into it, obviously it was pretty clear that Bruno wanted him on the show and wanted him to be in the WWF, and they, because Bruno was such a big name, they were willing to allow his son to wrestle just to keep Bruno around. And you can see why later in this match. Beefcake, for his part, like I said, pretty big guy. I don't know exact height. I'm going to guess, a good 6'3" and pretty muscular at this time. Good looking dude before, he had the accident yet. His manager was Johnny Valiant, who was, or Jimmy Valiant.
No, Johnny.
Oh, yeah, Johnny. My bad. I wrote one, Johnny the other, but his brother was Jimmy, or his kayfabe brother was Jimmy Valiant, the Valiant brothers back in the day.
Luscious Johnny Valiant, to be exact.
There you go. Luscious Johnny Valiant. Kind of a, if you saw him and Bobby Heenan side by side, that you could probably pass them off as brothers. They had the bright jackets and the blonde hair and looked a lot alike. But Brutus had just come to the WWF as well in 1984. He obviously had worked with Hogan before back in the AWA. They were really good friends. But Brutus gets a lot of, I guess, flack, maybe more recently, because he was Hogan lackey or whatever you want to call him. But he was okay. He was mega over as the barber. Like he was one of the bigger stars in WWF had. But he was back in these days. He wasn't a terrible worker or anything either. He could do some things, and he looked good. The match itself, I've not noted a ton because David Sammartino really not a very good worker.
No.
It kind of ends, in a bit of a schmoz. They kind of went at it, and then Bruno got involved. Jimmy Valiant gets involved, and I believe it was a double disqualification.
Yes, it was.
Excuse me. At about 11 minutes. The thing that I noted really about the match itself was that Bruno Sammartino was still over big time. Like he got the biggest pop of the match easily was when he got involved. They were, the crowd livened up immediately.
Yep.
Bruno got involved and started doing some stuff. Bruno ended up cleaning the house and getting everybody out of the ring, and Valiant and Beefcake fled the ring. But yeah, the pop for Bruno Sammartino was really big. And as for David, I don't think he really had much of an appearance. Maybe one more appearance after that. Like he was pretty much gone after this. He didn't stick around. There would end up being some harsh feelings from Bruno over, I think, as well, and they kind of split from the WWF for a while. He didn't really have any association with them after that.
Yeah, I think it said David left in '86.
There was an incident where he punched a fan who supposedly spit on him. He said the fan spit on him, so he punched him, and I think he was pretty much fired after that. I think he was arrested, actually, at that incident, and then he was fired after that, and I guess Bruno was pretty upset about him being fired, so he was gone for a while. I guess they eventually made things, but yeah, it was definitely not didn't work out with the whole David Sammartino situation. No. Certainly not to the degree that his father did. But as far as the match goes, I wasn't a big fan of it. I didn't. The ending was okay, double disqualification. I guess it makes sense at least. To be honest, it probably should have had. I think I probably would have just had Beefcake go over. But I'm guessing that Papa Sammartino did not want that
sure.
to happen. So they just ran as a double DQ. Did you have any? Did you like it more than I did? Because I didn't really care. Raw.
No, it was okay. Beefcake looked fine. Sammartino just wasn't a good enough worker to make the match any more than what it was. Bruno was very over
to carry a match like
no.
Like Steamboat may have been able to do something with him, or one of those Savage or one of those.
Yeah, no.
Bruce wasn't quite good enough to do that.
No, he wasn't good enough for that. Bruno was the most over part of the match. Which makes sense. He's by far the biggest name of the match. People were there to see big names. That's what WrestleMania 1 was. I get why they had the double DQ. Brutus was the better wrestler. Probably should have went over, but you're probably right. Bruno probably was having none of it, I would imagine.
Right. Yeah, that's my guess. I don't know that, but
just after a little research, I seen that anytime Bruno was in attendance in the matches, David would have like a main event match, and when Bruno wasn't there, David was like an enhancement. Right. So I mean that's kind of just how it comes off. But it was fine.
Yeah. Excuse me. Next up, first of all, we had Lord Alfred Hayes back in the way again. But that leads us into Junkyard Dog versus Greg Valentine, which, again, we go back to the Intercontinental title feud, and that would play a part in this match, actually. But Junkyard Dog, interesting career. He's another guy who kind of bounced around. He was in the Independents. He was in the WWF. He was in WCW. He was back in the WWF. He was back in the WCW. Bounced around, but, as he got older, he got less and less in shape. But he was another dude that fans absolutely love. Like this guy, when he came out into the arenas, the place went nuts. Like he didn't have to be in shape. He didn't have to really do anything besides show up and bring the chain with him, and fans just popped huge every time he came out. He was a big time star.
Yep.
Greg Valentine obviously, as we mentioned, was the Intercontinental Champion. Intercontinental Champion, having won it from Tito Santana back in the year before. The match itself here, as I said, this was kind of the main feud that was played out during this whole WrestleMania event. In this one, they get in their spots, and by that mainly I mean Junkyard Dog, whose spots are often, as I said, he was over no matter what he did. And one of the things he would do was he would on all fours would just kind of run with it head down and technically headbutt the other person, but there's no way it had any force behind it at all.
No.
But obviously sell it is sort of similar to, maybe now you can compare it to maybe the People's Elbow or something.
Yeah.
But it looked silly, but the crowd ate it up, of course, because Junkyard Dog could literally do anything he wanted to. But he got in his spots, and then Valentine obviously worked on the leg. Jimmy Hart, who we didn't mention, was here as Valentine's manager. At one point in the match, the Valentine gets the pin, but the Junkyard Dog got his feet on the rope or under the ropes. I can't remember which it was now. I know he had on the rope.
Valentine put his feet on the rope.
Yeah, there you go. But the ref missed the spot and declared Valentine the winner. Tito comes down to the ring, obviously the big enemy of Greg Valentine, and tells the ref what happened, and they restart the match, at which point Valentine refuses to participate. He just leaves the ring, gets counted out. So, kind of a bummer ending, I guess. He didn't really, but it made sense.
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of things. So this way, Junkyard Dog gets the win. So the crowd gets happy. Hey, our guy won. But Valentine doesn't have to lose the match. He doesn't get pinned. Stay strong as far as belt purposes go, Intercontinental Championship, and it furthers the feud, obviously, with Tito coming down to interfere in Junkyard's behalf. And, the crowd obviously popped for that as well. Definitely, of course, backing Tito over Valentine. What'd you think of this one?
I enjoyed the match. Junkyard Dog's fun to watch. Valentine's a good worker. The endings, I mean, WWE used to do a lot of these back in the day. There was a lot of disqualifications, a lot of countouts. Which again,
some WCW stuff when we start getting dusty finishes.
Which was again to keep finishes from being on the TV shows and keep people coming to the house shows to where they made money.
Right.
So I get it. I enjoyed the match. It was probably my favorite up to that point. A couple things. Tito Santana. There you go. Tito Santana could just come out and get a match restarted, but you can't get a match restarted in WWE for anything today.
Yeah.
I mean, in the next match, you'll see
referees, and we'll see it a bunch. Like I said, it's going to, especially in WCW. Their finish at Dusty Rhodes was such a good booker and had such great ideas, and the matches were always really good, but they didn't know how to do any finishes at all. It would always be kind of weird referee business where the referee somehow would not see something happening like right here beside of him. It became bizarre. It always kind of irked me back in those days.
Well, I mean, in the very next match,
completely stupid. Like, this is real. The referees should all be fired and probably shot.
In the very next match, there's something the referee misses and nobody comes down to help them out. It's a weird thing that WWE does with their refs. But also, Greg Valentine, Junkyard Dog, and Tito Santana all went into the WWE Hall of Fame the same year.
Oh, did they? I didn't even notice that.
2004.
Yep. All deserved, too. To be clear, they definitely all three pretty easily. I don't know if there's such a thing as a first ballot Hall of Famer in WWE or not, but if there is, there's not really much of an argument against.
No.
Especially maybe you could argue against Junkyard Dog if you don't want to count in as much of his independent / WCW time.
Right.
For me, they're all three easy Hall of Famers, and their spot. That's cool if they all went in together, even though they clearly had divergent careers after this point.
Yeah.
The next matchup, and again, I noted Lord Alfred Hayes. I had so much fun watching Lord Alfred Hayes through this whole show. he caught flags to the face in this one. Then obviously the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov come out with their respective flags, and he just faced by both flags. The Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov with Freddie Blassie as the manager. Some of you guys that know more about some of the old school wrestling may remember classy Freddie Blassie. They would be facing the U.S. Express, and then the U.S. Express is an interesting tag team for me. The U.S. Express was made up of Barry Windham and of Mike Rotunda. Both those guys would go on to much greater fame in other I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but other incarnations, I guess, would be the thing to say. Barry Windham would obviously go on to be part of the Four Horsemen and what some consider the best group of Four Horsemen. And then obviously Mike Rotunda would have several roles, but he's most well known for IRS. Later on in his career in the WWF. But here they are the U.S. Express. They are the babyface tag team. Barry Windham, another guy that people may not remember him quite as well at this time because, like I said, he's more known for his WCW time. But this was another big guy. And he's another jacked up guy. At this point in time, like he's like 6'8". He's huge, and he's also he's muscular. Just a big, gigantic dude that looked good and was easy to cheer for. Had the blonde hair, almost Hogan-like. And when we get to it, there is a future event in WCW where he is sort of played off as Hulk Hogan. They kind of make people think that it's Hulk Hogan and it's actually Barry Windham. But that's pretty far down the line. The match here, they come out. Obviously, when you have one of the 80s old school Russians involved, they've got to sing the Russian national anthem. Always gets massive heat. Just old school booking with that. They have a tag team match. Tag team wrestling is something that I haven't always been a big fan of. Like, I don't always get into the tag team matches as easily. It has to be a really good match, I guess I should say, or into the tag team match. Like, it's just not my thing. Obviously certain tag teams I can watch more than others, like the old school Legion of Doom, Road Warriors, the Steiners. Like, those are usually good matches. But these are guys that generally have worked together so long that they do it effortlessly. Tag team matches for me aren't always really good matches for me. I have a harder time. Like I said, I have a harder time getting into them. What are your thoughts? I guess we'll let you kind of jump in. What is your thoughts on this match in particular, but in tag team wrestling in general?
I enjoyed this match. All four workers in this are, even if the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov aren't expert as far as wrestling goes, they're both very good at what they do. Iron Sheik knows how to get heat. He's very, very good at it. Barry Windham and Mike Rotunda are both good wrestlers. The ending made sense.
We should point out the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov would win the title here.
Sheik would hit one of them with the cane.
He hit Windham.
Okay.
Yeah, with the cane. Freddie Blassie's cane.
Yes.
That he always carried with him.
Did you know?
And the new champions, of course.
That Barry Windham and Mike Rotunda are brother-in-laws.
Yes. It's interesting. They have some sons that are Rotunda. I guess it is his sons.
Yes.
White, whose name is Windham Rotunda. Mixture of Barry Windham and Mike Rotunda. So it's really cool. They are really good friends and now family.
And then Bo Dallas.
Their legacy goes on. Bo Dallas is the other one. Yeah, I don't know his real name, but
Taylor, I think, is his real name.
Cool that the talent has obviously passed on. Both of those guys were good worker. They were all-time greats in my opinion. Rotunda. Rotunda's gimmick never, he never quite settled into one career-long gimmick. He bounced around with Michael Wall Street, to IRS we mentioned, so sort of simple. But he had some other ones too. There was the ill-conceived Captain Mike Rotunda at one point in WCW. He was a baby face for about 27 minutes with that one. But he was still a fantastic worker. He went on, I believe, after he retired from in-ring work and was an agent for the WWE for quite some time, or a trainer, something behind the scenes like that. So he carried on.
Yeah,
He was a better worker. Like, he was a big guy, but he was also a good worker and was just a really charismatic dude. He was easy to always fun to watch as well. Excuse me. Again, I noted that Lord Alfred Hayes was back in action. I don't know why I noted it so many times. It just, for some reason, it just cracked me up watching him,
because it was always funny.
Fumble through his run. Like, it made me smile every time. Next up, we had a match that wasn't very good, and when it wasn't,
No.
and it was never intended to be good. The storyline here was that there was a body slam challenge, and Andre the Giant, still a babyface at this point, and Big John Studd, who was the heel, were going to have a match, and it was a body slam challenge. If Andre the Giant could body slam Big John Studd, he won $5,000. Bobby Heenan was with Big John Studd at that point, would later on be with Andre the Giant, interestingly enough. And I don't know if you know this, but apparently, and I did learn this from Bruce Pritchard on the Bruce Pritchard show, Something to Wrestle with Bruce Pritchard. Andre the Giant did not like Big John Studd at all, and did not like really any of the other big guys or so-called giants. He wanted to be the only giant, but he, in particular, from my understanding, hated Big John Studd. He would, when they would wrestle, he would like stand on Big John Studd's hair when he was laying down, so that if he moved, it would pull his hair. Would take extra liberties. He just did not like him at all, which was the main reason that Big John Studd didn't stick around. If he came in a few times, would wrestle a few matches, and then was back out. That was the main reason why. I didn't like him, and of course, Andre being Andre, was going to be the favorite if it came to a choice.
Yeah,
with Andre. But again, there wasn't much to the match. Obviously, Andre gets the body slam. He then takes the money out of the bag and starts throwing it around. From my understanding, that was not supposed to happen. He was supposed to grab a handful out, and then Bobby Heenan was supposed to run off with the money. Well, Andre obviously has very large hands, big stack of money, and started throwing it around. Heenan takes the money. They run off to the back. But that was something that I found pretty funny as well. Andre, what are you going to do? You can't. What are you going to?
Yeah.
Like, option. If he does something that you didn't want to do, what are you going to say? Don't do that again. Okay. Right. He's going to do whatever he wants to.
I find it odd that they only billed him at like 460 pounds in this match.
The weights were funny because even later on when you get some of the other bigger guys like Yokozuna, like the weights were never consistent. Like 1 minute they'd weigh 460, and then when they were going against, depending on who the opponent was, like they would so and then when they would go to Yokozuna would fight Lex Luger, suddenly he was like 530, and then
it was a real
like 560. Like, it was, the weights were never consistent. And of course the heights and stuff are always kind of just whatever worked for the company at the time. Whatever. Next up was the women's match. We get a scene finally, maybe that worked out a little better for Lord Alfred Hayes, depending on, I guess, his taste. But he gets kissed on the way by Leilani Kai and Fabulous Moolah on their way to the ring. Fabulous Moolah, I know that she had on the crazy glasses. Is this where she had on like the dollar sign glasses? I know she had some of those. I didn't make a note of what they looked like. I just noted that she.
I can't remember if she had those on or not.
I know she wore some like just big green dollar sign glasses, which I always found fascinating as well. Need to get me a pair of those.
Yes.
Gene Oakland, and I specifically noted Gene Oakland made a comment at that point when she came in wearing the glasses to me. Gene said not to let Jesse Ventura know that she had them, which I thought Jesse Ventura obviously is known as the flashy dresser. We always have the crazy cuts and the fur, the boas, and all the crazy outfits. So I thought that was pretty funny. We get a match here, and I don't want to knock female wrestlers from the 80s, but because nothing is their fault, and they weren't bad by any means. So let me be clear. But I get the feeling that the training for the women wrestlers back then and the training for the women wrestlers of more recent times is completely different. know Fabulous Moolah really just kind of had a lot to say of the training of the women back then, and they just weren't allowed to do to do much. It was a lot of very simplistic holds, and Wendy Richter did have a couple of nice moves. Excuse me, I don't know why my throat's hurting. But Wendy Richter would eventually, through the match, get the win. It wasn't a bad match for back then.
It wasn't.
I don't want to insult the women wrestlers, but if you go back and watch some of the women wrestlers from the 80s, from WWF or from WCW, a lot of those matches weren't very good. This one wasn't bad. Wendy Richter would get the belt back. She had lost it previously, as I mentioned, to Leilani Kai. She wins it back here. It just wasn't a bad match. But what did you think?
No, it was a fine match. There was nothing wrong with it. For as far as women wrestling goes back then, it was probably about as good as you could have hoped for. You got Cyndi Lauper involved. You got the Fabulous Moolah involved. You got a little bit of everybody involved. The babyface wins the title back. Cyndi Lauper gets to celebrate. It did what it was meant to do.
The finish was one that it gets used. I've noticed it more often since I've been going back and rewatching all the shows. But the finish was that Leilani Kai went up and hit the crossbody off the top rope, and Richter rolled it on through and ended up getting the pin. This will pop up more, like I said, it'll pop up more down the line as well. But I thought it was an interesting finish. I believe that's the first instance that I hadn't seen it. I've watched a little bit of some of the older stuff, and that was the first time I remember seeing it anyway.
Yeah.
But I thought that was at least an athletic looking finish. Like, that's not easy to do. You have to time that just right. Hit the move, of course, off the top, but also have to roll correctly, and so nobody gets hurt, and it looks right. So that was a pretty good. Like I said, for women's match, it was only 6 minutes and 14 seconds. It's not a long match. Again, it's the other interesting thing for me was the outfits. Like, nowadays, the women wrestlers have these nice elaborate outfits that they wear to the ring. Back in the 80s, they just wore swimsuits. It was just a one-piece bathing suit, and this is just what you wore.
That's just what you
got. This leads up to our main event, which was, as I said earlier, Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff, Mr. Wonderful. Another one of my favorites, by the way. I know he was mostly a bad guy in WWF, but for whatever reason, I was a big fan of his. I do remember him from the old, I don't remember the name of it might have been Rockin' Wrestling or I don't. Anyway, there was a cartoon, a Saturday morning cartoon that featured the WWF wrestlers, and I believe that Orndorff was one of the good guys on that. But I was always a big fan of Orndorff. I thought he was another guy that's pretty underrated when you're talking about all-time greats from that era. But here he's a heel. He's Roddy Piper's partner. They also have Cowboy Bob Orton. Cowboy Bob Orton may be most notable for wearing that cast that apparently his arm was broken for about 7.5 years. He always had the cast on. On the other side, Mr. Wonderful, or maybe not Mr. Wonderful, since that's Orndorff, but Mr. Everything, Hulk Hogan. We were right in the midst of Hulkamania. Just won the belt the previous year from the Iron Sheik. He would go on to hold the belt for quite some time. Mr. T is his partner. Teamed up with Hogan. Mr. T wasn't. I remember Mr. T. I think first from the 18. And he was obviously kind of the strong man of the group. But I didn't really, and he was obviously in Rocky as well. But he's another guy that we've mentioned with Steamboat and with Barry Windham. Back at this time in 1985, Mr. T was pretty jacked up too.
Yeah.
He was pretty badass looking, but him and Hogan team up. The match, sorry, I've got 2 pages worth of notes on this one match, and I was trying to 13 minutes approximately for the match. Obviously, back then it's kind of a running joke on Bruce Pritchard's podcast that Hogan must pose. That was the mandate. So Hogan in a match, he's in the main event. He's probably going to win at the end of it, and even if he doesn't, he's going to come out on top in this match. The finish comes when Orton tries to use his 7-year-long broken arm, come down and hit Hogan. Instead, he accidentally hits Orndorff. Orndorff is completely knocked unconscious, and they roll him up, get the pin. And in the end, his co-conspirators, I guess, so to speak, Orton and Piper vacate the ring and leave, Orndorff to fend for himself inside the ring. That would go on, and that storyline would play out, later on down the line. But Hogan gets the win. As far as the match goes, I guess it depends on how you look at it. For me, anyway, like if you're a Hulk Hogan fan and you wanted to see Hogan win and celebrate and pose and do all the Hoganisms, then obviously the match was perfectly fine. It played out exactly how you would think it would. As far as a pure wrestling standpoint, like I don't know that any of those guys, obviously Mr. T is not even a wrestler. Hogan's going to be known for his wrestling skill in the ring. Piper was a great promo and, did something, obviously very charismatic himself and could do a lot of good things, but he wasn't necessarily known for his wrestling skill. He's more of a baller in the ring.
Yeah.
Orndorff probably was the best pure wrestler out of the bunch.
Probably.
He was, Orndorff, another guy, by the way, who absolutely looked like if there's a Greek god on the show, it might be him. He was in fantastic shape.
Yeah.
But not necessarily going to be a Matt classic, I guess I should say, out of this tag team match. What did you think when you watched that one?
Going into it, having the expectations for what it was going to be, it was very good at what it was meant to do. It was meant to get pops from the crowd, let the crowd go home happy, let Mr. T and Hulk Hogan have their moments.
Muhammad Ali got his moment too, because they, of course, when you've got the champ in the match, you're going to let him get a moment in, and he had his at one point. He punched Piper for was getting in his face. The crowd chanted Ali, Ali, Ali. So they ate it up, of course. So, obviously they had we mentioned some of the guests earlier. I should point out here, Billy Martin was the guest ring announcer. Liberace was the guest timekeeper, and Muhammad Ali was the guest referee, although that capacity was not an in-ring referee. He was on the outside.
Yeah, Pat Patterson was the referee in the ring.
Pat Patterson was, the note, Pat Patterson was the in-ring referee. Patterson obviously would go on to much greater fame behind the scenes, but he was a referee. In this match.
He also went on to much greater fame as an on-screen lackey.
Yeah, he was the stooge.
Him and Briscoe.
Yeah, him and Briscoe, which was classic moments of WWF TV later on. Yeah. One of the all-time greats, Pat Patterson, and it seemed like he was really good at everything that he did. So, big congrats for him.
He got knocked out by Piper after him and Orton left the ring.
Yes.
So, but no, it was good for what it was. Anything with Hogan and a non-wrestler and Mr. T is not going to be, Steamboat Savage. It's just not. But you have to look at those matches through a different lens than you do everything else. Hogan was a different kind of beast in the ring. He was very probably the most over thing maybe ever in WWE.
You could argue it'd be him and Stone Cold would be the 1 and 2 as far as the greatest, draw probably in the history of wrestling.
Yeah. But everybody got their moment. And it was fun.
They wanted at the end. Orndorff finally leaves. He wakes up after he was knocked out. He gets up and he looks confused. He's trying to figure out what happened. Then he finally just kind of storms out of the ring. And Hogan gets to go around and do all of his poses and his, to the crowds and gets to do all the Hoganisms that the crowd paid to see. So the crowd goes home happy, which was really, it's interesting. We talk about some of the WCW shows. The two shows are almost mirror images of each other. Whereas WWF was a babyface territory, and you would see Hogan on top and would have the belt forever. And even when he lost it, then you had a run with the Ultimate Warrior
Yeah.
would be champion. The babyface Bret Hart would be champion. They went with babyface champion quite a bit. Over on the other side, on WCW, you had Flair, who was a heel champion, and it was almost like as much as Hogan had the belt as a babyface, Flair had the belt on the other side as a heel, and it was a heel champion with a babyface chasing all the time. So it's interesting to me to kind of bounce back and forth and watch between the shows, which is what we're going to do. If you want to see both, if you're interested in the histories of both of these companies and their pay-per-views, we're going to do both. In 1985, there was actually 2 WCW pay-per-views, but the first one was Bash at the Beach. We're going to just skip that one because I don't think there was anything too notable with that one. But we're going to do Starrcade 85, which had one of my favorite matches of all time with Magnum TA and Tully Blanchard in a cage. One of the most brutal matches as far as a mainstream match. You can obviously go find some crazy stuff on YouTube and from Independence and Japan and stuff, but and some things anything involving Mick Foley, I guess.
Yeah.
But it was a really good match, and so watching from one to the other, WWF was all about the pomp and circumstance and the crazy characters and the poses and the look. Whereas WCW, the wrestlers looked like a bunch of dudes from the bar that might just take you out back and beat the crap out of you.
And that's
so
probably to a point why at that time WWE was probably more mainstream. Because as far as, to me now watching wrestling, I think a heel champion with a face chasing is more entertaining. But as far as kids and selling and all that, Hulk Hogan, you can't beat him at that point.
Well, that's what WWF was. They wanted to be mainstream and they wanted to market to the kids. That's who they wanted to eat up their product was kids who obviously looked up to Hulk Hogan. I did. Yep. Whereas WCW catered to a different audience. Like that wasn't what they were shooting for. They weren't trying to have the kids tune in and they probably didn't. Some probably did, but they were more about the actual wrestling product. They were more gritty. They didn't have the money for the big budget, the big production and all that kind of stuff, but they made up for it with, in my opinion anyway, better matches and like I said, a more gritty, more adult-oriented product that it was just too different. It was just like I said, it was almost exact opposites of each other, the two companies.
And that's on what almost won WCW the Monday Night Wars.
Yeah, it did for a long time.
The realism behind what they did with the NWO, which we'll see. Yeah. With them attacking and them, you almost thought it was a real gang attacking WCW.
If they could have figured out how to translate the NWO into another story of some kind, then who knows how the whole late 90s plays out.
Yep.
Unfortunately, they couldn't quite manage to transition from the NWO into anything.
And they've talked about it. Too much money to wrestlers who had too much control, and a lot of it was.
We'll talk about it when the time comes.
Yeah.
But obviously, I'm sure Eric Bischoff has some thoughts.
Oh, I'm sure.
I've heard some of them. He's got a podcast as well with Conrad Thompson and talks about it. But it wasn't all on him either. I know he gets the blame, but there was a lot.
There's plenty of blame to go around.
A TV company, and the TV company had certain demands,
and
it just became too convoluted and too messy, and then eventually blew up, of course. But that's a little ways off. In 1985, the WCW didn't exist yet. It was Jim Crockett Promotions, and they were part of the NWA.
Yep.
And Ric Flair was around at the height of his powers. The Fantastic Four. I may read too many comics. The Four Horsemen were the biggest thing. They were the main story. They were held the belts a lot of the time. They were the icons of the industry, so to speak. You had Dusty Rhodes. You had Magnum TA, who before his accident was a megastar in waiting. Like if you watch him wrestle, like he was everything. He looked good. He was big. He was well built. He could wrestle. He could talk. Was just going to be a huge star. But we'll get to that. But Starrcade is where we're going to start with WCW, and then we'll bounce back to WWF again with WrestleMania 2. And then about that time, the two companies kind of added a few pay-per-views on. We'll get to Royal Rumble and SummerSlam and
I think Survivor Series was an early one.
Survivor Series was first, I believe. It was actually the second after WrestleMania. Survivor Series, then Royal Rumble, which actually didn't start as a pay-per-view. It was just a special on USA.
Yeah.
Then SummerSlam, and then I think King of the Ring. They were 4 for quite a while, and then King of the Ring eventually. But we'll definitely get to all those and talk about it. Hopefully, we will kind of evolve this show and get a little bit better. I will try to make my notes next time readable. That's probably is step one. Hopefully, if you guys give us a chance and tune in and watch the show, and give us a chance to kind of figure out our interactions and our kind of groove to do this, and what works and what doesn't, and we'll make it better as we go.
Interesting little tidbit for you.
Oh yeah,
Iron Sheik, Nikolai Volkov, Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, Cowboy Bob Orton, Rowdy Piper, and Hulk Hogan all went in the Hall of Fame the same year.
Oh wow!
Yep,
that's basically the whole match except for Mr. T.
Yeah,
I believe is also in the Hall of Fame.
I believe you're right. Yes.
There's a wing that has some interesting.
And Jimmy Hart went in that year. So.
Oh well, Jimmy Hart deserves to be in there too.
Deserves
to be in there, I guess.
Jimmy Hart was fantastic. So
one of the great characters of all time.
Yes.
Even now, if you ever get a chance to hear him talk on a podcast or some kind of live show or whatever, he is still exactly the same as he was in 1985 at WrestleMania 1. It's the same dude.
I need him to have his the big thing he used to talk through.
The megaphone, yeah. Yeah, he probably still has it. I would guess. I'm still used to it.
He does.
But we'll get into some of that as we go along. We'll hopefully you join us again. We should be back next week, and we will be talking about Starrcade 1985, main evented by Magnum TA. Actually, I think the main event was actually involved Flair, but the main event for me was Magnum TA versus Tully Blanchard in the cage, and I quit match.
It was Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair.
Yeah, Flair and Rhodes was the main event, which was also pretty good, and one of the few times that I won't give away the ending, but it was a pretty good show, and I'm pretty excited to talk about it as well. Most people are more familiar with the WWF product. It was obviously because of the success of the WWF, people have seen more WWF than they did WCW. For me particularly, I hadn't seen a lot of WCW, so it was really interesting to go back and watch all these. I don't think I ever watched WCW. As a matter of fact, as a kid, maybe here and there a match or two, but it was never on. We didn't get TBS, so I couldn't watch WCW. I did at least be able to catch a Saturday night's main event here and there on NBC.
Funny enough, Jimmy Valiant is on the Starrcade 85 show, while Johnny Valiant was on the WWF show. So.
Yep. There's some interesting matches, to say the least. I'm pretty excited to talk about it. So hopefully you will join us next week. We'll talk about that. And then if you're only interested in the WWF product, then we should be back in 2 weeks, and we'll hit WrestleMania 2. And I believe we get another Hulk Hogan main event that ends basically the same way as all Hulk Hogan matches tend to do.
It's I think it's a cage match at WrestleMania 2.
I have no idea, to be honest. I haven't looked ahead that far.
I think 3 is him and I think 3 and him is Andre.
3 is Andre for sure.
I think 2 is him and King Kong Bundy in a cage.
Yeah, it is King Kong Bundy for sure. For whatever reason.
I think it's a cage, but I won't swear to that.
It doesn't matter. Hogan must pose.
Hogan wins. Yeah, it doesn't matter how.
We'll get to that in a couple of weeks. Appreciate you guys tuning in. If you guys check us out, like I said, hopefully we'll make this better as we go. I will, at least, if nothing else, I'll try to be in at least standard definition next time instead of whatever 8mm type stuff going on this side of the screen. So we'll at least hopefully maybe in HD next time. But appreciate you guys tuning in, and hopefully you'll give us a chance next week, and we'll talk some WCW.